Hare Krishna, continuing from the previous video. In this video, I'm going to talk about the last section of the second chapter, which is basically about the qualities of a sthita pragya, or person fixed in intelligence. In verse number 14, if you remember, Lord Krishna had briefly touched upon the topic of sense control. In the 14th verse, Lord talks about how the senses are very impetuous. They are hard to restrain. And in the Shastra, scriptures, the senses are compared to horses, wild horses. And imagine, and that analogy is given of a chariot that is driven by 5 horses, and these 5 horses are wild horses going in all directions, very hard to control them. The chariot is compared to our body. The 5 horses are 5 senses, gyan, the senses by which we get the gyan, our knowledge of the world around us. The reins holding the horses is the mind, and the driver of the chariot is the intelligence, and the passenger sitting at the back is the soul. So the point here is that Lord Krishna tells Arjuna, the material world is made of dualities. That's the nature of the material world. And the senses are like those horses which is exploring this material world, and even one sense which is attached to its object can make it difficult for the person to progress spiritually. It can cause his downfall. So the 14th verse talks about the difficulty of sense control, and the 15th verse, Lord says that a person who has learned to control his senses, he's eligible for liberation. So that was the verse 14 and 15. And the reason why I mentioned that is because that is now going to be linked to the forthcoming verses. In the last section, in the last video, we Lord talks about how Arjuna should rise above the Vedic Karma Kanda, and he should not be caught up by the flowery language of the Vedas. And in the verse number 53, Lord talks about Achala Buddhi. He says that a person with fixed in intelligence, which is Achala Buddhi, and that person is eligible for liberation. The verse is Shruti pratipannati yada stasyati nischala samadha vachala buddhis tada yogam avapsyasi. The key word here is Achala Buddhi. When your mind is no longer disturbed by the flowery language of the Vedas, and when it remains fixed in the trance of self-realization, then you will have attained the divine consciousness. Now, verse number 54 to 72, Arjuna, that's the next section, which is about Sthita Pragya, and Arjuna starts that section by the question. Arjuna uvacha Sthita pragyasya ka bhasha samadhisthasya keshava sthitadi kim prabhasheta kimasita vrajeta kim. So Arjuna is asking a series of questions about Achala Buddhi, which Krishna had just mentioned, and Arjuna calls it Sthita Pragya, basically Achala Buddhi, same as Sthita Pragya, a person fixed in intelligence. Arjuna says, Sthita Pragyasya ka bhasha. What? Well, literally it means, ka bhasha means what is his language. But the implied meaning is that what are the symptoms of a person fixed in intelligence? The next question Arjuna asks is Kim Prabhashita, how does he speak? That's a literal meaning, Kim Prabhashita. But the implied meaning is that how does he respond? That's what it implies. Kimasita, how does he sit? Now Arjuna is clearly not talking about some ramp model. How does he walk? How does he sit? That's not what he's asking, because this is a poetry. The language is different, so it's metaphorical. So Kim Asita, how does he sit means sitting implies sense control. So how does he control his senses? Kim Brajeta, how does he walk? And here that's a literal meaning, how does he walk? But the implied meaning is how does he respond to the sense objects? So there are 4 questions that Arjuna asked, and Lord Krishna will answer them in the subsequent verses. In the verse number 55, Lord says, the symptoms of Astita Pragya. Lord says that one who gives up all material desires which arise from the mind and is satisfied in the self is said to be Stita Pragya. In the verse number 56 and 57, Lord talks about in response to Arjuna's questions about Stita Pragya's response to the dualities. Such a person, a Stita Pragya person is undisturbed. Number 1, even in the midst of threefold miseries. What are threefold miseries? In the material world, everyone is subjected to threefold miseries, which are Adi Bhautik, Adhyatmik, and Adi Devik, which is caused by the Devi Devatas and which is caused by other living entities, and then the third one is which is caused by our own self. Astita Pragya is not too happy when there's happiness, and he is not too sad when there's sorrow. He's free from attachment, fear, and anger. Vita Raga Bhaya Krodha. Such a person is called a sage of steady mind. He is unaffected everywhere in the world. Whatever good or bad he obtains, he is not praising it, not despising it. Such a person is firmly fixed in perfect knowledge. That's a Stita Pragya. And further, Lord, now one thing we need to understand is that when we get some happiness, it is because of our good credit karma which we have accumulated. So when we are enjoying good things, it is our good credits that are being exhausted. So in a way, that's not something to be happy about, because your good credits are getting over, you see. And when you're suffering, it's your bad karma which is getting exhausted, so which is actually a good thing. So suffering is something to be happy about, because you are getting rid of your bad karma. And enjoyment is actually a bad thing, because you are using up all your pious credits. So when you understand that, you will not be too happy when there is good things happening, and you will not be too sad when there is something bad happening. So that is basically how Astita Pragya sees the world. Now coming to the next question of Sthita Pragya, sense control. Lord says that he gives the example of a tortoise. A tortoise is capable of withdrawing its limbs when there is an external stimuli. It is spontaneously able to withdraw its limbs. Lord Krishna says Sthita Pragya, or a person of steady intelligence, should be like that tortoise. But it is natural for a tortoise to withdraw its limbs, but for us it is very difficult. So how do we do that? It doesn't come spontaneously. So here Lord says when one experiences a higher taste, the lower taste, the hankering for the lower taste automatically drops. As an example, remember when you were a little child, you used to play with toys. And but as you grow older, you don't fancy those little toys anymore. Why? Because you've developed a higher taste. Now those toys don't give you any joy anymore. Similarly, a person, when he develops a higher taste, which is love for God, then all the material sense pleasures do not give him that joy anymore. It doesn't excite him because he's got a higher taste. You can also think about it as, you are holding, you are collecting beautiful pebbles from the seashore, right? But then somebody gives you a bag of beautiful diamonds. Okay, when you see those beautiful gemstones, you will automatically drop those pebbles because they don't seem that beautiful anymore, because you found something which is even more precious. So if you try to restrain your senses by force, that's not going to work for a long time, But if you develop a higher taste, then the lower sense gratificatory things will automatically cease. So that was verse number 59, where Lord tells Arjuna to develop a higher taste. And in verse number 60, Lord says, even for a great sage, sense control is very difficult, because senses are so impetuous and strong that even great people fall down because of their senses. And here one example is that of Vishwamitra. Vishwamitra was a Raja Rishi and a great Rishi who had done great austerities. He had undertaken austerities for 10,000 years. And then what happened was the king of heaven, Indra, became a bit worried. He thought that maybe Vishwamitra is trying to usurp his position. So Indra sends Menaka, a heavenly damsel, Menaka, an Apsara, to seduce Vishwamitra. And Vishwamitra got seduced. He united with Menaka, and Shakuntala was born as a result. So Vishwamitra could not achieve sense control. Though he undertook 10,000 years of austerities, his senses were still not in his control, and he fell down from his high position. And then Vishwamitra realized his mistake, and again he undertook another 10,000 years of austerities. Again Indra became worried, and this time he sent another Apsara called Ramba. Now, when Ramba came, Vishwamitra understood that, this is the same thing repeating, and Vishwamitra became angry. This time he turned Ramba into a stone. So, Vishwamitra was still not sense controlled. So first time he gave in to lust, second time he gave in to anger. Both times he fell down. So you can see how difficult it is even for great sages to control their senses. In the verse number 61, Lord says, for the first time, verse 61 is important because for the first time, Lord Krishna directly says that sense control is possible only by direct devotion to him. Tani sarvani samyamya yukta asita matpara vashehi yasyendriyani tasya prajna pratishtita. So in the 61st verse, for the very first time, Lord directly refers to himself, mat para. When your mind is engaged in my service, then sense control becomes easy. Otherwise, if you try to control your senses, it would be like trying to control the wind. It will be very difficult. Analogy here can be given of a person who is trying to fight the darkness. If you just try to fight the darkness, it will not go away. But if you bring in something positive, if you turn on the light, then the darkness will automatically go away. So here the light refers to God. And so sense objects and sense gratificatory work is like the darkness, and if you just try to fight it on your own, you may not be very successful. So you have to develop a higher taste, and the higher taste is in this context is service to Lord. The verse number 62 to 63 are quite famous again, and which talks about the mind control. Dhyayato vishayan pumsa sangastashyopajayate sangat sanjayate kama kamat krodho bhijayate krodhat bhavati sammohat sammohat smriti vibhrama smriti bhramshat buddhinasho buddhinashat pranashyati. Now this is a chain reaction where Lord says that when you contemplate on sense objects, what happens is that you develop an attachment for them. When you develop an attachment for your sense objects, what comes next is that you develop lust for it. When lust is not fulfilled, it gives rise to anger. When lust is fulfilled, what happens is it gives rise to greed. You want more of that same thing. If you don't fulfill it, anger develops. And when anger develops, then what happens is you get deluded. From anger, delusion arises. And from delusion, bewilderment of memory. And when memory is lost, intelligence is lost. And when intelligence is lost, one falls down. So that's a chain reaction, which all starts with contemplating on the objects of sense. In the verse number 64 up to the last verse 72, Lord speaks about the Sthita Pragya, person of steady intelligence, sense engagement. The 65 verse talks about attaining Lord's mercy or prasada. And when one's senses are controlled by engaging them in the Lord's service, you attain Lord's mercy. And the 66th verse talks about how without connecting to the Supreme, one cannot enjoy permanent happiness or peace. The 67th verse talks about how even one of the senses which is agitated can take away a man's intelligence. Again, think about that chariot example, where even you have your 5 horses, 4 of the horses are tamed, they're in control, but one horse is still wild, and that horse can take the chariot haywire out of its normal road. And the 69th verse is also popular. It says, Ya nisha sarva bhutanam tasyam jagrati samyami yasyam jagrati bhutani sa nisha pashyato muni. What is night for all beings is the time of awakening for the self-controlled sthita pragya. The time of awakening for all beings is at night for the introspective sage or sthita pragya. Here, night and day are not only literally meant, it also is metaphorically meant. For example, in the daytime, the materially oriented person engages in all sorts of materially motivated activities, going to work, going shopping, doing this, doing that, which for a sage of steady intelligence, all those sakam karmic activities seem like darkness, because the person is in darkness. He is engaging in so many fruitive activities. So what is day for the material person is night for the sage. When the sage is engaged in Krishna conscious work, or the sage is engaged in spiritual practice, sadhana, the materially motivated person is not able to understand that. Therefore, that seems like darkness for him. So what is day for the sage is night for the unintelligent, materially motivated person. Now 70th verse, Lord compares a person of steady intelligence to an ocean. All the rivers enter into the ocean, but the ocean remains calm. It's not agitated. Similarly, a sthita pragya is not agitated by the incessant flow of desires. This is because that the sthita pragya has a consciousness that is very deep and very big. A person who is not sthita pragya, his consciousness is bound to petty things. In one of the lectures, His Grace Chaitanya Charan Prabhu talks about an anecdote. Once he was traveling in a train, Prabhuji was traveling in a train, and he saw a person sitting on the other compartment, and he had his hands inside a bead bag. So people in ISKCON know that, when you do japa, you put your hand inside a bead bag. So Chaitanya Charan Prabhuji thought that that person had his hand in a bead bag, and he went to say Hare Krishna to that person and to exchange greetings. So Chaitanya Charan Prabhuji just touched that bead bag, and he was asking something about chanting, and the other person got so upset and he screamed. He yelled and said, "Don't touch my bag." And Prabhuji was surprised. What happened? What is there in the bag? So he said that bag contains his nails, he has been growing his nails for a long time, and he wanted to enter into the Guinness Book of World Records for having the longest nails. So when somebody comes close to that bag, he gets agitated. So his consciousness is situated in his nails. So when your consciousness is situated or bound to small petty things, you will get easily agitated. But if your consciousness is engaged in Krishna, you will not be agitated by the different changes or ripples in the river or ocean, and you'll be like that ocean who is unaffected. And in the 71st verse, Lord talks about the qualities of the Sthita Pragya, and 72nd verse, the last verse, talks about the destination of such a person. So that was the end of the second chapter, which basically, just a recap, the first 10 verses was Arjuna's dilemma, Arjuna's confusion, and finally Arjuna surrendering to Lord Krishna and seeking his guidance as a Shishya. Arjuna becomes Lord Krishna's disciple, and that first 10 verses tells us about how sometimes in life, when things are beyond our comprehension, one needs to consult one spiritual master who can guide us. The next section is where Lord Krishna establishes our primary identity as spirit soul. Though we may have different identities, the most fundamental and deepest and eternal identity is that we are spirit souls. Now comes the question, so if we are spirit souls, what are we meant to do? Then Lord Krishna talks first on the basic level of Karma Kanda, Vedic Karma Kanda, where if you follow the injunctions of the Vedas, it guides you how to work so that you can get good result. Basically, it is fruity work or sakam karma, which is the most basic level of guidance. For example, if a person's senses are not controlled and he's indulging in sense gratificatory activities in a very erratic and whimsical way, the Vedas give a guidance as to how one has to live a regulated life. For example, if somebody is eating meat all day, every day, then to such a person you give some regulation. Okay, if you were fond of eating meat, eat on this particular day. So there is some regulation to the sense gratification. It is not unregulated. So that is the purpose. So that's a very basic level of guidance. And above that is the more higher principle, working with higher principles, which is Nishkam Karma Yoga. First is the Sakam Karma, above that is the Nishkam Karma Yoga. So that was the next section. Because Lord says to Arjuna that even if you get very good results and rewards for your fruitive activities, those results are temporary. You're again going to be moving in the cycle of birth and death. So aim for something which is sustainable, which is long lasting, which is Nishkam Karma Yoga. And then Arjuna questions Lord about what are the symptoms of such a person with Achala Buddhi or a Sthita Pragya. And the last section, Lord elaborates on sense control, mind control, and how a person of Achala Buddhi how he engages his sense organs on objects. And Lord also talks about how our senses can cause our downfall. And he gives the example of a tortoise, how to withdraw the senses. He gives the example of an ocean, how ocean remains calm despite the rivers keep flowing into it. And thus, this finishes the second chapter. Hope that you've understood something. Thank you for watching. All glories to Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna.